The clang of a gunshot echoed through the dusty streets of Del Rio, Texas, in 1876, as Genevieve Fairchild's world shattered into 1,000 pieces. She stood frozen on the wooden sidewalk, the letter in her trembling hands delivering news far worse than her husband's death. He'd gambled away everything they owned, including her. "Mrs. Fairchild," Sheriff Tanner said gravely, removing his hat as he approached. "I'm afraid I must inform you that the auction will take place tomorrow at noon." Genevieve's throat constricted, her honey-brown eyes widening in disbelief. Surely there must be some mistake. People cannot be sold in this country anymore. "It ain't slavery, madam," the sheriff clarified, looking uncomfortable. "It's a labor contract. 7 years of service to clear Warren's debts. The law is clear on this in Texas. A man's debts don't die with him when there's collateral named in the gambling notes." At 32, Genevieve had believed her life settled. After marrying Warren Fairchild 5 years ago, she'd left behind her position as a schoolteacher in Boston to follow his dreams west, dreams that had turned to dust along with his promises. "I'll fight this," she said, clutching the letter so tightly it creased. Sheriff Tanner sighed. The circuit judge approved it already. Holcomb and his creditors made sure everything was legal. "I'm sorry, Mrs. Fairchild." That night, Genevieve sat alone in what had been her home, a modest 2-story house on the edge of town. Tomorrow it would belong to someone else, along with the furniture, Warren's mercantile business, and apparently her freedom. The kerosene lamp cast long shadows across the floor as she contemplated fleeing. But where would she go? Warren had left her penniless, without even enough for a stagecoach ticket. She opened her trunk and removed her finest dress, a deep green silk that complemented her auburn hair. If she was to be humiliated, she would face it with dignity. As dawn broke over the hills surrounding Del Rio, Genevieve pinned her hair up carefully, her fingers working methodically despite her racing heart. She washed her face with cold water, trying to erase the evidence of a sleepless night. Her reflection in the mirror showed a woman she hardly recognized, pale, drawn, but with a determined set to her jaw that hadn't been there before. By 11:30, a crowd had gathered in the town square. Genevieve stood at the edge, wrapped in a shawl despite the warm May air, watching as Victor Holcomb, Warren's primary creditor and owner of the town's saloon, supervised the auction of her possessions. Each item represented a piece of her life being dismantled before her eyes. "And now," Holcomb announced, his voice carrying across the square, "the final item to settle the late Mr. Fairchild's considerable debts." His eyes found Genevieve in the crowd. "Step forward, Mrs. Fairchild." Her legs felt like lead as she moved through the parting crowd. Whispers followed her like snakes, some pitying, others cruelly amused. She kept her gaze fixed on a point above their heads, refusing to acknowledge their stares. "A 7-year labor contract," Holcomb continued, unfurling an official-looking document. "The bearer gains full rights to Mrs. Fairchild's domestic services until the debt of $2,000 is satisfied." Genevieve fought the bile rising in her throat. Domestic services. A pretty euphemism for what amounted to indentured servitude. "Bidding starts at $500, Holcomb announced. "$550, called a voice from the crowd. Mr. Peterson, the banker who had always looked at her too long when she visited the bank with Warren. $600, countered another, the widowed rancher Simmons, known for working his ranch hands to exhaustion. The bidding continued, each increment driving Genevieve deeper into despair. These were her neighbors, people she had greeted on the street, served tea to in her home. $850, called Peterson again. $900, countered Simmons. $1,000, said a new voice, deep, steady, cutting through the square like a knife. The crowd parted, revealing a tall man Genevieve had never seen before. He wore dust-covered clothing and a worn leather vest, his face partially shadowed by a wide-brimmed hat. A gun belt hung low on his hips, the holster tied down the mark of someone who knew how to use it. "Lucas Taylor," someone whispered nearby. "From the White Rock Ranch." 1100, Peterson snapped, clearly annoyed by the newcomer. The stranger Lucas stepped forward, his spurs jingling softly. 1500. A hush fell over the crowd. It was well above market value for such a contract. 1600, Simmons tried, but his voice lacked conviction. 2000, Lucas said calmly, the full amount of the debt. Holcomb's eyebrows rose. "Any other bids?" He surveyed the crowd, finding no challengers. "Sold to Mr. Taylor for $2,000. Genevieve's heart hammered in her chest as the tall stranger approached. Up close, she could see he was younger than she'd initially thought, perhaps 35 or so. His face was tanned and weathered from the sun, with lines around his eyes that spoke of squinting against bright horizons. His eyes were a startling blue against his sun-darkened skin. "Sign here, Taylor," Holcomb said, offering the contract and a pen. Lucas took the pen but ignored the contract. Instead, he stepped closer to Genevieve. "Mrs. Fairchild," he said, his voice quieter now. "I don't believe we've been properly introduced. Lucas Taylor." She looked up at him, searching his face for some clue to his intentions. "Why?" was all she could manage. Instead of answering, he turned to Holcomb. "The debt is settled in full." He pulled out a bank draft and handed it over. Holcomb examined it carefully before nodding. "Your property, Taylor," Holcomb said, pushing the contract toward him again. Lucas took the contract in his hands, looked at it for a long moment, then, to the astonishment of everyone present, tore it in half, then in quarters. Then he let the pieces flutter to the dusty ground. "No one owns another person," he said, his voice carrying across the suddenly silent square. "The debt is paid. Mrs. Fairchild is free to go wherever she pleases." Genevieve stared at him in shock. "I don't understand." "There's nothing to understand, madam. Your husband's debts are cleared." He tipped his hat to her. "Good day." Before she could respond, he turned and started walking away, leaving Genevieve standing amid the shocked murmurs of the crowd. "Wait," she called, gathering her skirts and hurrying after him. "Mr. Taylor," he paused, turning back to her. "Why would you do that?" she asked. "You don't know me." "No, madam, I don't," he agreed. "But I know what's right and what isn't." He glanced back at the town square where people were still watching them. "Perhaps we could continue this conversation somewhere less public." Genevieve hesitated only briefly before nodding. "My former house is just down the street." They walked in silence, Genevieve acutely aware of the stares following them. When they reached the house, she realized with a pang that it was no longer hers. It would be sold to cover other debts. "I'm afraid I have nowhere to offer you to sit," she said, embarrassed. "That's all right. I don't plan to stay long," Lucas replied. He stood with his hat in his hand, studying her. "Mrs. Fairchild, I've arranged a room for you at Mrs. Wilson's boarding house. It's paid up for 2 weeks. That should give you time to decide what you want to do next." Stunned, Genevieve could only stare at him. "Why are you helping me?" A shadow passed across his face. "Let's just say I've seen what happens to people in your situation, and I couldn't stand by and watch it happen again." "I have nothing to repay you with," she said quietly. "I'm not asking for repayment." He set his hat back on his head. "The room is yours starting today. Mrs. Wilson is expecting you. And what then? In 2 weeks, what am I supposed to do? I have no money, no prospects." The reality of her situation was beginning to sink in. Lucas regarded her thoughtfully. "I understand you were a teacher before you married." Genevieve nodded, surprised he knew that detail. "Del Rio could use a good teacher." The schoolhouse has been closed for months since Miss Jenkins left to get married. I'm on the town council. I could put in a word." Hope flickered within her for the first time in days. "You would do that. Consider it done." He moved toward the door. "Take today to collect what personal belongings you can. I'll send a wagon for them tomorrow." As he reached for the door handle, Genevieve called out, "Mr. Taylor." "Thank you. I don't know how I'll ever live your life well, Mrs. Fairchild. That's thanks enough." With a tip of his hat, he was gone. Genevieve stood in the empty house, listening to his bootfalls fade away on the wooden porch. For the first time since receiving the news of Warren's death, she allowed herself to cry not from despair, but from an overwhelming relief and confusion that a stranger would show her such kindness. Later that afternoon, Genevieve walked to Mrs. Wilson's boarding house with only a small valise of personal items, clothing, a hairbrush, a locket containing a picture of her parents. Everything else would have to wait for the promised wagon. Mrs. Wilson, a plump widow in her 60s with kind eyes and a no-nonsense manner, greeted her warmly. "Mr. Taylor explained your situation. I'm so sorry about your husband, dear, and that business with the auction. Disgraceful." She showed Genevieve to a small but tidy room on the second floor. "It's not fancy, but it's clean and quiet. Meals are at 7, noon, and 6. Don't be late or you'll miss out." "Thank you, Mrs. Wilson. Mr. Taylor mentioned he'd arranged for 2 weeks. Indeed he has. Paid in advance, too." Mrs. Wilson fussed with the curtains. "He's a good man, that Lucas Taylor. Keeps to himself mostly, but he's always fair. Been running White Rock Ranch for about 5 years now. Built it up from nearly nothing." Genevieve sat on the edge of the bed. "I've never seen him before today. He doesn't come to town much. Too busy with the ranch, I expect." Mrs. Wilson headed for the door. "Rest now, dear. Dinner's at 6. Left alone, Genevieve unpacked her few belongings and contemplated her future. Could she really start over here in Del Rio, the same town where everyone had witnessed her humiliation? At dinner, she met the other boarders, 2 elderly sisters who taught piano, a young clerk from the general store, and a widowed doctor. They were polite but curious, stealing glances at her throughout the meal. News traveled fast in small towns. "Is it true Lucas Taylor tore up your contract right there in the square?" the younger of the sisters finally asked, unable to contain her curiosity. "Mary," her sister scolded. "It's all right," Genevieve said softly. "Yes, he did. I still don't understand why, Doctor." Bennett, the widower, spoke up. "Taylor's not one for showy gestures. If he did that, he had his reasons." "But what reasons could a stranger have for helping me?" Genevieve wondered aloud. "Perhaps he just believes in doing what's right," Dr. Bennett suggested. "Or perhaps he has his own history with such matters." The conversation drifted to other topics, but Genevieve remained preoccupied with thoughts of her mysterious benefactor. Why would a man she'd never met spend so much money to help her, then walk away expecting nothing in return? The next morning, true to his word, a wagon arrived from White Rock Ranch. The driver, a weathered old cowhand named Josiah, tipped his hat to Genevieve. "Mr. Taylor sent me to collect your things, madam. Said to take whatever you point to." With Josiah's help, Genevieve salvaged what she could from her former home: her books, a rocking chair that had been her mother's, some kitchen items, and clothing. It wasn't much, but it was something to start with. "Mr. Taylor also asked me to give you this," Josiah said, handing her an envelope as they finished loading. Inside was a note written in a firm, clear hand. "Mrs. Fairchild, I've spoken to the town council. They're in need of a teacher and would be pleased to meet with you tomorrow at 10 o'clock at the town hall if that suits. The position pays $30 a month plus room and board at the schoolhouse. Regards, L." Taylor. Tears pricked at Genevieve's eyes. a position, independence. It was more than she dared hope for. "Thank you," she told Josiah. "Please tell Mr. Taylor I'm very grateful." Josiah nodded, looking uncomfortable with the emotion in her voice. "He's a good boss. Best I've worked for." "How long have you worked for him?" she asked, curious to learn more. "Since he bought White Rock 5 years back. Place was run down something awful. Previous owner let it go to seed. Mr. Taylor turned it around. Got about 20 hands now, good herd of cattle. And he runs it all himself. Yes, never married. Lives in the big house alone, except for the cook and housekeeper, old Mexican couple named Ortiz." With that small glimpse into Lucas Taylor's life, Josiah tipped his hat and drove away with her belongings, promising to deliver them to Mrs. Wilson's. The meeting with the town council the next day went better than Genevieve could have hoped. The 5 men, including Sheriff Tanner and, to her surprise, Dr. Bennett from the boarding house, were respectful and straightforward. "We need someone who can handle children of all ages," Mayor Collins explained. "Our last teacher only managed 3 months before deciding frontier life wasn't for her. I taught in a one-room schoolhouse in Massachusetts for 4 years before marrying," Genevieve replied confidently. "Children from 5 to 16. I'm not easily intimidated." The men exchanged approving glances. "There's living quarters behind the schoolroom," the mayor continued. "Basic, but private. The term would start in September, but we'd need you to begin preparations next month." "That would be perfect," Genevieve said, hope blooming in her chest. "There's one more thing," Sheriff Tanner added, looking uncomfortable. "Some folks in town might not take kindly to you teaching their children given recent events." Genevieve stiffened. "I had no knowledge of my husband's gambling. I've done nothing wrong." "No one's suggesting otherwise," Dr. Bennett said quickly. "But people talk. Are you prepared for that?" "I've already endured public humiliation, gentlemen. I can handle whispers and stares if it means rebuilding my life." After a few more questions about her educational background and teaching philosophy, the council voted unanimously to offer her the position. Mayor Collins shook her hand, officially welcoming her as Del Rio's new school teacher. As the meeting concluded, Genevieve noticed Lucas Taylor standing in the back of the room. Their eyes met briefly before he slipped out the door. She hurried after him, catching him on the steps of the town hall. "Mr. Taylor," she called. He turned, and for a moment, Genevieve was struck by how the sunlight caught in his eyes, making them appear almost silver blue. "Mrs. Fairchild," he acknowledged with a slight nod. "I wanted to thank you for speaking to the council on my behalf." "You got the position because of your qualifications," he said simply. "I merely suggested they consider you. Nevertheless, I'm grateful." She stepped closer. "I still don't understand why you're helping me." A shadow passed over his face. "Let's just say I believe everyone deserves a second chance." Before she could press further, a voice called from across the street. "Taylor, just the man I wanted to see." Lucas grimaced slightly. "Excuse me, Mrs. Fairchild, duty calls." With a tip of his hat, he was gone again, crossing the street to meet the bank manager. Over the next 2 weeks, Genevieve settled into a routine at the boarding house while preparing to move into the schoolhouse quarters. She spent her days exploring Del Rio, reacquainting herself with the town not as Warren Fairchild's wife, but as Genevieve Fairchild, the new schoolteacher. The whispers followed her, as expected. Some people were openly hostile, like Victor Holcomb, who refused to serve her when she entered his general store. Others, like Mrs. Peterson at the millinery shop, were cautiously friendly. "It wasn't your fault, what Warren did, Mrs. Peterson said as she helped Genevieve select fabric for new curtains for the schoolhouse. "My Henry says your husband was in too deep with the wrong sorts for years." "I had no idea," Genevieve admitted. "He always told me the business was doing well." Mrs. Peterson clucked sympathetically. Men and their pride. They'd rather die than admit failure. And in Warren's case, I suppose that's exactly what happened. Genevieve visited the schoolhouse daily, cleaning and preparing it for the upcoming term. The building was sound but neglected, with dusty windows and cobwebbed corners. The living quarters in the back consisted of 2 small rooms, a bedroom, and a combination kitchen and sitting area. It was modest but would be hers alone. One afternoon, as she was washing the schoolhouse windows, a wagon pulled up outside. To her surprise, Lucas Taylor himself jumped down from the driver's seat. "Mr. Taylor," she greeted him, pushing a stray lock of hair from her face. "This is unexpected. Mrs. Fairchild." He removed his hat, revealing hair the color of wheat fields in late summer. "I was in town on business and thought I'd check on your progress. As you can see, there's much to be done." She gestured to the half-cleaned windows and the interior, where desks sat haphazardly. "May I?" he asked, indicating the door. "Of course." He stepped inside, his tall frame making the schoolroom seem smaller somehow. He examined the space with a critical eye. "The roof looks sound, but that back wall has water damage." "Yes, I noticed that. The mayor says they'll send someone to repair it before the term starts." Lucas ran a hand along one of the desks, frowning at the gouges in the wood. "These have seen better days. Children will be children," Genevieve said with a smile. "I'm more concerned about having enough books. I might be able to help with that." He met her eyes. "I have a fair collection gathering dust at the ranch. Nothing fancy but classics, history, some science texts." "That would be wonderful," she said, genuinely pleased. "The school budget for new books is almost non-existent." He nodded, then reached into his pocket and pulled out a small package wrapped in brown paper. "I actually came to give you this." Genevieve took it, curious. Unwrapping the paper revealed a small brass bell. "A school bell," she said, touched by the thoughtfulness of the gift. "Every teacher needs one," he said, a hint of a smile softening his features. "This one came from back east, has a nice ring to it." She rang it gently, the clear tone filling the schoolroom. "It's perfect, thank you." An awkward silence fell between them. Genevieve found herself studying his face, noticing the small scar on his chin, the way one eyebrow was slightly higher than the other. "Well," he finally said, putting his hat back on, "I should let you get back to your work." "Mr. Taylor," she said quickly before he could leave, "would you like to stay for tea? It's the least I can do to thank you for everything." Surprise flickered across his face, followed by something that might have been pleasure. "That's kind of you, but I don't want to impose." "It's no imposition. I was about to take a break anyway." She gestured to the small stove in the corner where a kettle sat. "Unless you have urgent business elsewhere." After a moment's hesitation, he nodded. "Tea would be nice." Genevieve busied herself with the kettle while Lucas took a seat at one of the student desks, looking comically large in the small space. She smiled to herself at the sight. "Something amusing, Mrs. Fairchild?" he asked, catching her smile. "I was just thinking you look like a giant in a dollhouse," she admitted, setting out 2 chipped cups she'd found in the cupboard. To her surprise, he laughed, a warm, rich sound that transformed his face entirely. "I haven't sat at a school desk since I was 16. Don't think I was much smaller then, though." "Where did you go to school?" she asked, pouring the tea. "Pennsylvania originally. Then after my parents died, I moved west with my uncle, finished my schooling in St. Louis." "I'm sorry about your parents," she said softly, handing him a cup. He shrugged. "It was a long time ago. Influenza took them both within a week of each other. I was 14. That must have been difficult." "Life often is." He sipped his tea. "Your husband, how did he die, if you don't mind my asking?" Genevieve sat down across from him, cradling her cup. Shot in a saloon in San Antonio. Apparently, he accused someone of cheating at cards. Was he in San Antonio often? More often than I knew, it seems. She sighed. Warren told me he was expanding the mercantile business. In reality, he was gambling away everything we had. Lucas studied her over the rim of his cup. You didn't suspect. I trusted him. The bitterness in her voice surprised even her. Foolishly, perhaps. We'd been married 5 years, and I believed in our partnership. Trust isn't foolish, Lucas said quietly. Breaking it is. Their eyes met, and Genevieve felt a strange connection with this man, an understanding that went beyond words. He knew something of betrayal, she sensed. The moment was broken by the sound of horses outside. Lucas rose and looked out the window. Stagecoach is in, he observed. Which reminds me, I have mail to collect, of course. Genevieve stood as well, taking his empty cup. Thank you again for the bell, and the books whenever it's convenient for you to bring them. I'll have Josiah deliver them tomorrow, he promised. At the door, he paused. Mrs. Fairchild, there's a social at the church this Saturday. The whole town will be there. Might be a good opportunity for you to meet the parents of your future students. Are you suggesting I attend? She asked, surprised by the invitation. I'm suggesting it might be beneficial professionally, he clarified, though there will be gossip. There already is gossip, Mr. Taylor. I might as well face it directly, he nodded approvingly. 7 o'clock then. Good day, Mrs. Fairchild. As promised, Josiah arrived the next day with 3 crates of books, far more than Genevieve had expected. There were novels by Dickens and Hawthorne, poetry collections, histories of America and Europe, science texts, and even a beautifully illustrated atlas. Mr. Taylor said to tell you these are a donation to the school, not a loan, Josiah explained as he helped her carry the crates inside. There must be over 100 volumes here, Genevieve marveled, running her fingers over the leather-bound spines. Mr. Taylor's always been a reading man, Josiah said with a hint of pride. Has a whole library room at the ranch house. That evening, as Genevieve inventoried her literary windfall, she discovered small notes tucked into some of the volume's previous owner's marks, she assumed. In a copy of the Odyssey, she found an inscription. To Lucas, may you find your way home. Father, Christmas 1862. The personal nature of the inscription gave her pause. These weren't just random books, they were part of Lucas Taylor's personal collection. Why would he part with such sentimental items? Saturday evening arrived, and Genevieve dressed carefully in her best remaining gown, a deep blue that complemented her fair complexion. Mrs. Wilson had helped her restyle it to appear more current, adding some lace at the cuffs and collar. You look lovely, dear, Mrs. Wilson assured her as Genevieve prepared to leave. Hold your head high. You've done nothing wrong. The church social was already in full swing when Genevieve arrived. Tables laden with food lined one wall, while a small group of local musicians played in the corner. Nearly everyone in Del Rio seemed to be present, and a noticeable hush fell over the crowd when she entered. Dr. Bennett was the first to approach her. Mrs. Fairchild, I'm glad you came. Let me introduce you to some of the parents. Grateful for his kindness, Genevieve allowed him to lead her through the crowd, making introductions. Some people were welcoming, others coolly polite, and a few openly hostile, particularly a group of women led by Mrs. Holcomb, Victor's wife. I'm not sure I'll be sending my Emmeline to school this term, Mrs. Holcomb said loudly as Genevieve passed. I hear the new teacher has questionable morals. Genevieve felt her cheeks burn but continued walking, head held high. Pay her no mind, Dr. Bennett murmured. Her husband probably lost money when your husband died without paying his debts. It seems I've inherited Warren's enemies along with his debts, Genevieve observed, And some friends, too," a familiar voice said from behind her. She turned to find Lucas Taylor standing there, looking surprisingly formal in a clean dark suit, his hair neatly combed. Without his usual trail dust and hat, he appeared younger, though no less imposing. "Mr. Taylor," she greeted him with a small smile. "I didn't expect to see you here." "Church socials are one of the few occasions that drag me into town," he admitted. "Mrs. Fairchild, would you care to dance?" The invitation was so unexpected that Genevieve could only stare at him for a moment. The musicians had just started a waltz, and couples were forming on the makeshift dance floor. Yes, thank you," she finally managed. As Lucas led her to the floor, she was acutely aware of the stares following them. He placed a hand respectfully at her waist, took her right hand in his left, and led her into the dance with surprising grace for such a tall man. "You dance well, Mr. Taylor," she observed. "My mother insisted I learn. Said no son of hers would stomp around a dance floor like a wounded bear." Genevieve laughed, relaxing slightly. A wise woman, she was. His expression grew thoughtful. "I think she would have liked you." The personal nature of the comment caught her off guard. "You barely know me." "I'm a good judge of character," he replied simply. "You've faced adversity with dignity. That says a lot about a person." They continued dancing, and Genevieve gradually became less concerned with the watching eyes and more aware of her dance partner, the solid strength of his hand at her waist, the clean scent of soap and something uniquely him, the way his eyes crinkled slightly at the corners when he almost smiled. When the music ended, Lucas escorted her to the refreshment table and got her a cup of punch. "People are talking," she noted, watching the whispers and glances directed their way. "Let them," he said dismissively. "Del Rio thrives on gossip. Next week it will be something else." "Why did you ask me to dance?" The question had been burning in her mind. Lucas met her eyes directly. "Because I wanted to." Before she could respond, Mayor Collins approached, his wife in tow. "Taylor, just the man I wanted to see. We need to discuss the water rights issue before the next council meeting." For the next hour, Genevieve circulated through the social, meeting more townspeople and potential students' parents. Lucas was drawn into conversations with other ranchers and businessmen, but she often felt his eyes on her from across the room. As the evening drew to a close, he appeared at her side again. "May I walk you back to the boarding house, Mrs. Fairchild?" The night air was pleasantly cool after the warmth of the crowded church hall. They walked in comfortable silence for a few minutes, the sounds of the social fading behind them. "Thank you for the books," Genevieve said finally. "They're a wonderful gift to the school." "I'm glad they'll be put to good use," he replied. "I notice some of them are quite personal," she said carefully. "The copy of the Odyssey from your father." Lucas was quiet for a moment. Books should be read, not gathering dust on shelves. "Still, it was generous of you." She glanced up at him. "You've been very kind to me, Mr. Taylor. I wish I understood why." He stopped walking, turning to face her. In the moonlight, his expression was unreadable. "Does there need to be a reason for kindness?" "In my experience, men usually want something in return," she said bluntly. A flash of something hurt, crossed his face. "Is that what you think of me?" "I don't know what to think of you," she admitted. "You spent $2,000 to free me from a contract. You secured me a position. You've given books to my school. What am I to make of such generosity from a stranger?" Lucas looked away, his jaw tightening. For a moment, Genevieve thought he wouldn't answer. When he finally spoke, his voice was low. "When I was 22, my sister found herself in a similar situation to yours. Her husband died unexpectedly, leaving gambling debts. I was away driving cattle to Kansas City. By the time I returned..." He paused, the pain evident in his voice. By the time I returned, she had been forced into a labor contract with a man who he broke off, unable to continue. What happened to her? Genevieve asked gently. She took her own life after 3 months. The words were flat, emotionless, but the grief behind them was palpable. I was too late to help her. I won't make that mistake again. Genevieve's heart ached for him. I'm so sorry about your sister. It was a long time ago, he said, echoing his earlier words about his parents. But when I saw you standing there at that auction, I couldn't walk away. They had reached the boarding house. Lucas stopped at the bottom of the steps, keeping a respectful distance. Thank you for telling me, Genevieve said softly. And thank you for the dance. He nodded, the vulnerability of moments ago hidden again behind his reserved demeanor. Good night, Mrs. Fairchild. Good night, Mr. Taylor. As July melted into August, Genevieve settled into her new life in Del Rio. She moved into the quarters behind the schoolhouse, making the small space her own with the few possessions she had salvaged. The town council approved funds to repair the water-damaged wall, and several parents volunteered to help clean and prepare the schoolroom for the upcoming term. Lucas Taylor remained a periodic presence in her life. Sometimes weeks would pass without seeing him. Then he would appear unexpectedly bringing a repaired desk he'd found in town, offering advice on a leaky roof, delivering more books for the school library. Their interactions were always polite, sometimes warm, but never personal enough to reference their conversation after the church social. One hot August afternoon, as Genevieve was arranging the freshly repaired desks in rows, a commotion outside drew her attention. She stepped onto the schoolhouse porch to see a wagon careening down the main street. The driver slumped over. People scattered out of the way as the horses, frightened and unchecked, raced through town. Just as the wagon was about to collide with a water trough, a rider on a chestnut horse galloped alongside it, leaped from his saddle to the wagon, and seized the reins, gradually bringing the panicked horses to a halt. It was Lucas. He jumped down from the wagon and carefully lowered the unconscious driver one of his ranch hands, Genevieve recognized, to the ground. A crowd quickly gathered. "Someone get Dr. Bennett," Lucas called, examining a bloody wound on the man's shoulder. Genevieve hurried forward. "Bring him to the schoolhouse," she said to Lucas. "It's closer than the doctor's office." With the help of several bystanders, they carried the injured man to the schoolhouse and laid him on Genevieve's desk. She quickly cleared away her papers and fetched clean water and cloth. "What happened?" she asked, helping Lucas remove the man's blood-soaked shirt. "Gunshot," Lucas said grimly, revealing an ugly wound in the ranch hand's shoulder. "This is Miguel Rodriguez, one of my men. He rode out this morning to check fences on the North Range. Doctor." Bennett arrived minutes later, medical bag in hand. "Gunshot?" he asked, immediately examining the wound. "Looks that way," Lucas confirmed. "Is he going to be all right?" Bullet went clean through. "He's lost blood, but if infection doesn't set in, he should recover." "Doctor." Bennett began cleaning the wound. "Mrs. Fairchild, could you boil some water, and I'll need clean bandages." While Genevieve busied herself with the doctor's requests, Lucas gently roused the wounded man. Miguel's eyes fluttered open, confusion evident in his gaze. "Patron," he murmured weakly. "I'm here, Miguel," Lucas said, his voice uncharacteristically gentle. "What happened?" "Rustlers," Miguel managed. "5 men, taking cattle from North Pasture. I try to stop them. They shoot me." Lucas's expression hardened. "Did you recognize any of them?" Miguel shook his head, then winced in pain. "Faces covered, but one had red hair. I see when wind blow his bandana." "Rest now," Lucas said, stepping back to let the doctor work. Genevieve brought the hot water and clean cloth she'd torn from an old sheet. "As doctor." Bennett cleaned and bandaged the wound. She noticed Lucas pacing the schoolroom, his face taut with anger. "You're thinking of going after them," she said quietly when they stepped aside to give the doctor space. Lucas's eyes met hers. "They shot my man and stole my cattle." "What would you have me do?" "Wait for the sheriff," she suggested. "Gather a proper posse." "Sheriff Tanner is 2 days' ride away at the county seat," Lucas replied. "By the time he gets back, those rustlers will be long gone with my herd." "Then at least don't go alone," she urged. "It's too dangerous." Something in her tone made him look at her more closely. "You're concerned for my safety, Mrs. Fairchild." "Of course I am," she said, flustered by his direct gaze. "You've been kind to me. I wouldn't want to see you hurt." A hint of a smile touched his lips. "I've been handling troublemakers since I was 16, but I won't go alone. I'll take some of my men." Dr. Bennett joined them. "Your man will recover, Taylor, but he needs rest and care. I'd recommend he stay in town for a few days where I can keep an eye on him." "He can stay at my place," Lucas decided. "Mrs. Ortiz will look after him." "Actually," Genevieve interjected, "he could stay here at the schoolhouse. I have the spare room and I'm here all day. It would be easier for Dr. Bennett to check on him." Both men looked at her in surprise. "That's very generous, Mrs. Fairchild," Dr. Bennett said, "but it might not be appropriate for a single lady to have a man staying in her home, even an injured one." "I'm a widow, not an unmarried girl," she reminded him. "And the town hired me to be responsible for children. Surely I can be trusted to care for an injured man without compromising my reputation." Dr. Bennett looked to Lucas, who seemed to be considering the idea. "It would be convenient," Lucas admitted. "And Miguel is a good man. He wouldn't cause any trouble." "Then it's settled," Genevieve said firmly. "He can stay in my spare room until he's well enough to return to the ranch." After some further discussion, they moved Miguel to the small bedroom in Genevieve's quarters. Dr. Bennett left medicine and instructions, promising to return in the morning. "I need to get back to the ranch," Lucas said as they stood on the schoolhouse porch. "Round up my men, track those rustlers before the trail goes cold." "Be careful," Genevieve said softly. He studied her for a moment, his expression unreadable. "I'll come back to check on Miguel tomorrow if I can." As she watched him ride away, Genevieve was surprised by the depth of her concern for him. In the few months since he'd torn up her contract in the town square, Lucas Taylor had become important to her in ways she hadn't anticipated. For the next 2 days, Genevieve cared for Miguel while continuing her preparations for the school term. The young ranch hand was a respectful patient, embarrassed by the imposition and grateful for her care. "Senor Taylor, he is a good man," Miguel told her on the second afternoon as she changed his bandage. "He give me job when no one else would hire Mexican, pay fair wages, treat all men same." "How long have you worked for him?" she asked, curious to learn more about Lucas. 3 years. "I was just boy when I start. 17. Now I am his top vaquero." Pride colored his voice despite his weakened state, "and he lives alone at the ranch." The question slipped out before she could stop herself. Miguel gave her a knowing look. "She, alone except for Senor and Senora Ortiz who keep house. Many ladies in town, they try to catch his eye, but—" He shrugged his good shoulder. "He not interested." Genevieve felt her cheeks warm. "I wasn't implying is okay," Miguel said with a small smile. "He look at you different." Before she could ask what he meant, the sound of horses approaching interrupted them. Genevieve went to the window and saw Lucas dismounting, along with Sheriff Tanner and 2 other men she didn't recognize. She went to the door to greet them. Lucas looked exhausted, with several days' growth of beard and dust coating his clothes. A small cut marked his cheekbone. "Mr. Taylor," she said, her relief at seeing him alive warring with concern over his appearance. "You're hurt." It's nothing, he dismissed, though he touched the cut self-consciously. How's Miguel? Improving. Dr. Bennett says the wound is clean, no sign of infection. Lucas nodded, then gestured to the men behind him. Sheriff Tanner returned sooner than expected. We caught up with the rustlers near the Mexican border. All 5 in custody, the sheriff confirmed. Taylor here identified the cattle as his by the brand. We're taking the men to San Antonio for trial. One of them resisted, Lucas added grimly. He won't be standing trial. The sheriff and his deputy left to secure the prisoners at the jailhouse, leaving Lucas standing on the schoolhouse porch with Genevieve. You should let me clean that cut, she offered. It could get infected. Too tired to argue, he followed her inside. Genevieve sat him at her small kitchen table and gently cleaned the dried blood from his face. Standing this close to him, she could smell the trail dust, sweat, and something distinctly masculine about him. You were right about the red-haired man, Lucas said as she worked. Leader of the rustlers, had a grudge against me for firing him last year. I'm glad you caught them, she said, her fingers lightly tracing the cut. It wasn't deep, but it would leave a small scar. Lucas caught her wrist suddenly, his large hand warm around her smaller one. Their eyes met, and Genevieve felt a jolt of something electric pass between them. Thank you, he said quietly, for caring for Miguel and for worrying about me. I wasn't worried, she lied unconvincingly. A ghost of a smile touched his lips. No, perhaps a little, she admitted. He still held her wrist, his thumb brushing lightly over her pulse point. The simple touch sent shivers up her arm. Genevieve, he said softly, using her given name for the first time. The intimacy of it made her breath catch. Yes. Before he could continue, Miguel called from the bedroom, breaking the moment. Lucas released her wrist and stood. I should check on him, he said, his voice returning to its usual businesslike tone. Genevieve remained at the table, her heart racing, wondering what might have happened if they hadn't been interrupted. The new school term began on the first Monday in September. 23 students ranging in age from 5 to 16 filled the schoolhouse, their curious faces turned toward their new teacher. Genevieve stood before them, bell in hand, feeling a mixture of nervousness and excitement. Good morning, children, she greeted them. I'm Mrs. Fairchild, and I'll be your teacher this year. The younger children responded enthusiastically, while the older ones, particularly the teenage boys, eyed her with skepticism. She recognized several faces from town, including the Holcomb girl, whose mother had apparently decided to send her after all. That first week was exhausting but rewarding. Genevieve assessed each student's abilities, organized them into appropriate learning groups, and established classroom rules. By Friday, even the most reluctant students were responding to her firm but kind teaching style. Miguel had recovered enough to return to the ranch, though Dr. Bennett advised light duties for another few weeks. Lucas himself had come to collect him, thanking Genevieve again for her care. The school seems to be off to a good start, he observed as they watched Miguel settle into the wagon. It is, she agreed. Though I have my work cut out with some of the older boys, they've missed a lot of schooling. They're lucky to have you, Lucas said, his blue eyes warm as they met hers. Del Rio needed a good teacher. There was a moment of awkward silence, both of them perhaps remembering their interrupted moment in her kitchen. Well, he said finally, I should get Miguel back to the ranch. Good day, Mrs. Fairchild. Mr. Taylor, she called as he turned to leave. The Harvest Festival is next weekend. Will you be attending? He looked back at her, something unreadable in his expression. Would you like me to attend, Genevieve? The use of her given name again sent a warm flush through her. Yes, she said simply. I would. He nodded, a small smile playing at the corners of his mouth. Then I'll be there. The Harvest Festival was Del Rio's biggest celebration of the year. The entire town gathered in the square for food, music, games, and dancing. Tables groaned under the weight of pies, roasted meats, and fresh bread. Barrels of apple cider and beer were set up in the shade of oak trees. Children ran laughing through the crowd, playing games of tag and hopscotch. Genevieve wore her best dress, a rust-colored silk that complemented her auburn hair, which she'd left partially down, secured with tortoiseshell combs borrowed from Mrs. Wilson. As the schoolteacher, she had certain duties at the festival, including judging the children's spelling competition and overseeing the apple bobbing. She was so busy with these responsibilities that she didn't notice Lucas's arrival until mid-afternoon. When she finally spotted him across the square, her heart gave an unexpected leap. He was engaged in conversation with Mayor Collins but seemed to sense her gaze, looking up to meet her eyes across the crowd. He gave her a small nod, which she returned with a smile before turning back to the excited children waiting for the next game to begin. Later, as the sun began to set and lanterns were lit around the square, the dancing began. Genevieve found herself in demand as a partner first doctor. Bennett, then several fathers of her students. She enjoyed the dancing but kept glancing around for Lucas, who seemed to have disappeared. Looking for someone, Mrs. Fairchild. A familiar voice asked at her elbow. She turned to find Lucas standing there, looking unusually formal in a clean white shirt and dark vest. He'd trimmed his beard and combed his hair, though it was already beginning to curl slightly at the ends. "Mr. Taylor," she greeted him, unable to keep the pleasure from her voice. "I was beginning to think you'd left. Had to see to my horse," he explained. "He doesn't care for crowds and noise." The musicians struck up a lively reel. Lucas extended his hand to her. "May I have this dance?" Unlike the more formal waltz at the church social, the reel required them to join a line of dancers, separating and coming together in a pattern. Genevieve found herself laughing as Lucas swung her around, his strong hand steady at her waist. "You look beautiful tonight," he said during a quiet moment when the dance brought them together. The compliment, delivered in his straightforward manner, made her cheeks flush with pleasure. "Thank you. You look quite handsome yourself." As the evening progressed, Genevieve noticed they were drawing attention. Mrs. Holcomb was whispering behind her fan to several other women, casting disapproving glances their way. "People are talking again," she murmured to Lucas as they walked toward the refreshment table after another dance. "Let them," he said, unconcerned. "You're a respected teacher now. They can hardly object to you dancing at a public festival." "It's not just the dancing," she said carefully. "It's who I'm dancing with, multiple times." Lucas stopped walking, turning to face her. "Does it bother you what they think?" Genevieve considered the question seriously. "It used to. After the auction, I felt like I had to prove myself worthy of respect again. But now—" She met his eyes directly. "Now I find I care more about what certain people think than others." "And what do you think I think of you, Genevieve?" he asked, his voice low. The directness of the question caught her off guard. I don't know," she admitted. Lucas looked as if he might say more, but they were interrupted by one of his ranch hands approaching with an urgent message about a problem at the ranch. "I'm sorry," Lucas apologized. "I need to go." "Of course," she said, trying to hide her disappointment. He hesitated, then leaned closer to her. "This conversation isn't finished. May I call on you tomorrow, after church?" Her heart quickened at the formal request. "Yes, I'd like that." With a tip of his hat, he was gone, leaving Genevieve wondering what he might have said if they hadn't been interrupted. The next day, Genevieve sat in church, only half listening to the sermon as she wondered what Lucas wanted to discuss. He hadn't attended the service, which wasn't unusual. He rarely came to town on Sundays unless there was a social event. After church, she returned to the schoolhouse to prepare lunch, her nerves making it difficult to concentrate on simple tasks. At precisely 2 o'clock, there was a knock at her door. Lucas stood on her porch, hat in hand, wearing a clean shirt and his good boots. "Mrs. Fairchild," he greeted her formally. "Mr. Taylor," she replied, stepping back to let him enter. "Please come in." Her small living quarters suddenly seemed cramped with his tall figure inside. She gestured to the table. "Would you like some coffee?" "That would be nice, thank you." As she busied herself with the coffee pot, she was acutely aware of him watching her. When she finally set the cups down and took a seat across from him, the tension between them was palpable. "You wanted to continue our conversation," she prompted when he remained silent. Lucas stared into his coffee cup for a moment, then met her eyes directly. "I've never been good with words, Genevieve. I'm a plain-spoken man." "I've always appreciated your directness," she assured him. He nodded, seeming to gather his thoughts. "When I first saw you at that auction, I acted on instinct. I couldn't bear to see another woman's life destroyed the way my sister's was." "I understand that," she said softly. "But after that day—" He paused, running a hand through his hair in a gesture of frustration. "After that day, it became about you, not just what happened to you, but who you are." Genevieve's heart began to beat faster. "I've watched you rebuild your life these past months," he continued. "Seen your dignity, your resilience, your kindness, the way you care for your students, the way you took in Miguel without hesitation." "Lucas," she said, using his given name for the first time. "What are you trying to say?" He reached across the table and took her hand in his. "I'm saying that I care for you, Genevieve, more than I expected to, more than might be wise." The simple declaration made her breath catch. "Why wouldn't it be wise? You've just regained your independence, built a life for yourself, and He hesitated. "I have a reputation for keeping to myself. The ranch takes all my time and attention." "Are those the only reasons?" she asked, sensing there was more. Lucas's grip on her hand tightened slightly. "I've been alone a long time, by choice. After what happened to my sister, I closed myself off, focused on building the ranch. It was safer that way." "Safer than what?" "Than caring for someone who might be taken from me, like my parents." "Like Caroline." The raw honesty in his voice touched something deep inside her. Genevieve turned her hand in his so their palms met. "Life offers no guarantees, Lucas, for any of us." "No," he agreed. "It doesn't." "So what are you proposing?" she asked directly. A hint of a smile touched his lips at her forthrightness. "I'd like to court you properly, Genevieve, if you're willing." Joy bloomed in her chest. "I am willing," she said simply. "Very willing." The smile that spread across his face transformed him, reaching his eyes and softening the lines of his face. He raised her hand to his lips and pressed a kiss to her knuckles, a gesture so unexpectedly tender, it brought tears to her eyes. "There's something you should know," he said, his expression growing serious again. "If we do this, if we court, people will talk more than ever. It might make things difficult for you at the school." "Let them talk," she said, echoing his earlier dismissal. "I'm a good teacher. That's what matters." Lucas studied her face, his blue eyes warm with affection. "You're a remarkable woman, Genevieve Fairchild." Over the next 2 months, Lucas courted Genevieve with the same quiet determination he brought to everything. He rode into town every Sunday after church to take her on proper outings, drives in his buggy along the river, picnics in the shade of oak trees, visits to neighboring towns for concerts or lectures. To Genevieve's surprise, the town's reaction to their courtship was mixed, but not overwhelmingly negative. Some, like Mrs. Holcomb, sniffed disapprovingly, but others seemed pleased to see the reclusive rancher finally showing interest in something besides his cattle. "You've been good for Taylor," Sheriff Tanner commented one day when he encountered Genevieve outside the general store. "Never seen him smile so much." Dr. Bennett expressed similar sentiments. "He's attending town council meetings regularly now. Even volunteered to host the Christmas pageant rehearsals at his ranch this year." Lucas was indeed changing, opening up not just to Genevieve but to the community at large. He began attending church services with her on Sundays, donated lumber for repairs to the schoolhouse roof, and offered jobs at his ranch to two of Genevieve's older students who needed to help support their families. As for Genevieve, she found herself falling deeper in love with Lucas as she came to know the man behind the reserved exterior. She discovered his dry sense of humor, his passion for books and learning, his unwavering sense of justice, and his gentle way with animals and children. One crisp November afternoon, Lucas took her to a special spot on his ranch, a hillside overlooking the valley, with White Rock Creek winding through it like a silver ribbon. The oak trees were ablaze with autumn colors, and the air was clear and cool. "This is beautiful," Genevieve said, gazing out at the valley from the buggy seat. "I can see why you love this land." "It wasn't much when I bought it," Lucas admitted. "The previous owner had let it go to ruin, but I saw its potential." "Like you saw mine," she said softly, understanding in her voice. He took her hand. "I didn't give you potential, Genevieve. You already had it. I just tore up a piece of paper." "It was more than that," she insisted. "You gave me a chance when others wouldn't." Lucas helped her down from the buggy and spread a blanket beneath an oak tree. They sat side by side, looking out over the ranch. "I've been thinking," he said after a comfortable silence, "about the future." "Have you?" she asked, her heart quickening. "The schoolhouse quarters are small, and the roof still leaks when it rains hard." Genevieve smiled. "Are you criticizing my home, Mr. Taylor?" "No, madam," he said seriously. "I'm suggesting you might consider a different one." He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small box. Genevieve's breath caught as he opened it, revealing a delicate gold ring set with a single diamond. "It was my mother's," Lucas explained, his voice rough with emotion. "My father gave it to her when they were married. I've kept it all these years, waiting for the right person." Genevieve supplied when he trailed off. "For you," he said simply. "Though I didn't know it until I saw you standing in that town square, head held high despite everything." Tears filled Genevieve's eyes as Lucas took her hand. "I love you, Genevieve Fairchild," he said, his blue eyes intense with feeling. "I love your courage, your kindness, your intelligence. I love the way you challenge me and make me want to be a better man. Will you marry me?" "Yes," she whispered, the tears spilling over. "Yes, Lucas, I will marry you." He slipped the ring onto her finger, then cupped her face in his hands and kissed her their first kiss, tender and sweet, filled with promise. When they finally drew apart, both a little breathless, Genevieve rested her forehead against his. "I love you too," she said. "More than I thought possible after everything that happened." Lucas wrapped his arms around her, holding her close. "I want to give you the life you deserve," he promised. "Not just security, but happiness." "You already have," she assured him. They were married on Christmas Eve in Del Rio's small church, decorated with evergreen boughs and red ribbons for the holiday. Nearly the entire town attended, curiosity overcoming any lingering disapproval of the match. Genevieve wore a new gown of ivory satin, with Lucas's mother's lace veil. Lucas, usually so at ease in the saddle, looked uncomfortably formal but undeniably handsome in his black suit. Dr. Bennett stood as Lucas's best man, while Mrs. Wilson, who had become a dear friend to Genevieve, served as her matron of honor. When the minister pronounced them husband and wife, Lucas's kiss was more restrained than it had been on the hillside, but his eyes conveyed all the love and promise Genevieve could have hoped for. The town hall had been transformed for the reception, with tables laden with food and a small band playing cheerful music. Even Mrs. Holcomb seemed to have softened her stance, offering stiff congratulations to the new Mrs. Taylor. "Never thought I'd see the day Lucas Taylor took a wife," Sheriff Tanner remarked as he shook Lucas's hand. "You've done well for yourself." "Better than I deserve," Lucas agreed, his eyes seeking out Genevieve across the room. As evening fell, Lucas and Genevieve departed for White Rock Ranch in a buggy decorated with ribbons and tin cans by the townspeople. The ranch house had been prepared for their arrival by the Ortizes, with a fire blazing in the hearth and candles lit throughout the rooms. "Welcome home, Mrs. Taylor," Lucas said as he carried her across the threshold. Genevieve looked around at the comfortable book-lined parlor. "It's perfect," she said, meaning it. The house was larger than she'd expected, solidly built and well-maintained with simple but good-quality furnishings. "It needs a woman's touch," Lucas admitted. "The Ortizes have kept it clean, but it's never really been a home." "We'll make it one together," she promised. Later that night, in the privacy of their bedroom, Genevieve discovered yet another side to her husband, a tenderness and passion that took her breath away. Warren had never been a considerate lover, treating their marriage bed as his right rather than a shared pleasure. But Lucas was different, attentive to her responses, gentle yet passionate in his lovemaking. Afterward, lying in his arms, Genevieve felt truly at peace for the first time in longer than she could remember. "I never thought I could be this happy again," she murmured against his chest. Lucas stroked her hair, his voice deep with emotion. "When I saw you at that auction, I only meant to right a wrong. I never imagined you would become my wife, my partner." He kissed her forehead. "My heart." The winter months passed in a blur of happiness, as Genevieve adjusted to her dual role as rancher's wife and schoolteacher. Lucas had insisted she continue teaching if she wished, and the town council had agreed, though some eyebrows were raised at the unconventional arrangement. Each morning, Lucas would drive her to the schoolhouse in the buggy before seeing to his ranch business, then return to collect her in the afternoon. On days when ranch work took him farther afield, Josiah or one of the other hands would drive her instead. The ranch house transformed under Genevieve's influence. She brought color and warmth to the rooms with curtains, quilts, and vases of wildflowers. She organized Lucas's beloved books properly and added her own smaller collection. The Ortizes, initially wary of having a mistress in the house after years of serving Lucas alone, soon came to adore her for her respectful treatment and genuine interest in their lives. Spring brought new challenges and joys. The cattle needed branding, fences required repair after winter storms, and new calves were born. Genevieve found herself learning aspects of ranch life she'd never imagined, from helping birth a calf to managing the ranch accounts. One evening in late April, as they sat on the porch watching the sunset, Lucas took her hand. "I've been thinking about expanding the ranch," he said. "The Jenkins property to the east is for sale. It would give us better access to water and another 1,000 acres of grazing land." Genevieve smiled at his use of us and we. In the month since their marriage, Lucas had truly made her his partner in all things. "Can we afford it?" she asked practically. "If we're careful for a couple of years, yes." He hesitated. "But it would mean more work, more responsibility." "You're worried about taking on too much." Lucas's thumb traced circles on her palm. "I'm worried about taking time away from you, from our family." The word family hung between them meaningfully. They hadn't explicitly discussed children yet, though both assumed they would have them someday. "I think we should do it," Genevieve said decisively. "If it's a good investment for our future, we should take the opportunity." Lucas studied her face in the fading light. "Have I told you lately how much I love you?" "Yes," she laughed, "but I never tire of hearing it." He pulled her into his lap, his arms encircling her waist. "I love you, Genevieve Taylor." "And I love you," she replied, resting her head against his shoulder. "More each day." As summer approached, Genevieve began to suspect what the persistent fatigue and morning nausea might mean. She confirmed her suspicions with Dr. Bennett before sharing the news with Lucas. She chose a quiet evening when they were alone in the parlor, Lucas reading reports from the cattle buyer in San Antonio while she mended one of his shirts. "Lucas," she said, setting aside her sewing. "I have something to tell you." He looked up, immediately attentive. "What is it?" "Dr. Bennett says we'll be welcoming a new member to our family around Christmas time." For a moment, Lucas just stared at her, processing her words. Then his face transformed with a joy so pure it brought tears to Genevieve's eyes. "A baby?" he asked, his voice hushed with wonder. "We're having a baby," she nodded, smiling through her tears. "A Christmas baby." Lucas was on his knees beside her chair in an instant, his hands gently covering her still flat stomach. "I never thought—" He began, then stopped, overcome with emotion. "Never thought what?" she prompted gently. "After my parents, my sister." "I never thought I'd have a family again," he admitted. "I'd accepted being alone, and now—" He looked up at her, his blue eyes shining. "Now I have you, and soon our child." He gathered her into his arms, holding her as if she were the most precious thing in the world. "Thank you," he whispered against her hair, "for giving me back what I thought was lost forever." The news of Genevieve's pregnancy spread quickly through Del Rio. The school board reluctantly agreed that she could teach through November, provided Dr. Bennett declared her fit to continue. Plans were made for a substitute teacher to take over for the remainder of the term and possibly the spring, depending on Genevieve's wishes after the baby arrived. Lucas became even more protective, insisting on hiring extra help at the ranch so he could be available to drive Genevieve to and from school each day. He personally inspected the buggy to ensure it provided the smoothest possible ride over the sometimes rough roads, and he began building a cradle for the baby in his workshop during the evenings. In September, just as Genevieve was beginning to show visibly, an unexpected visitor arrived at White Rock Ranch. Lucas was away, checking on the new property they'd acquired over the summer, and Genevieve was alone in the house except for Mrs. Ortiz in the kitchen. A carriage pulled up in the yard, and a distinguished-looking older man stepped out. Genevieve went to the door, curious about the visitor. "May I help you?" she asked from the porch. The man removed his hat, revealing silver hair and features that seemed vaguely familiar. "I'm looking for Lucas Taylor," he said. "I was told this is his ranch." "It is," Genevieve confirmed. "I'm his wife, Genevieve. Lucas is out checking the East Range but should return by dinner time. Would you care to wait?" The man studied her with interest. "His wife." "I wasn't aware Lucas had married." He smiled, the expression warming his stern features. "Yes, I'd like to wait if it's no trouble." Genevieve invited him inside, offering refreshments. As she served tea in the parlor, she studied the visitor more closely. There was something in the set of his jaw, the blue of his eyes. "Forgive me," she said suddenly. "But are you related to my husband?" The man set down his teacup. "I'm his uncle, Richard Taylor, the one who took him in after his parents died." Genevieve's eyes widened in surprise. Lucas rarely spoke of his uncle, and when he did, it was with a mixture of respect and resentment that she'd never fully understood. "It's a pleasure to meet you, Mr. Taylor," she said politely. "Lucas doesn't often speak of his family." "No, I don't imagine he does." Richard's expression turned regretful. "We had a disagreement many years ago. I've come to try to make amends." Before Genevieve could respond, they heard the sound of horses in the yard. Minutes later, Lucas entered the house, calling her name. "In the parlor," she answered. "You have a visitor." Lucas appeared in the doorway, still dusty from the ride. He froze when he saw Richard, his expression shuddering closed in a way Genevieve hadn't seen since their early encounters. "Uncle Richard," he said flatly, "this is unexpected." Richard stood. "Lucas, you're looking well." An awkward silence fell. Genevieve looked between the two men, sensing the tension that crackled in the air. "I'll give you two some privacy," she said, starting to rise. "No." Lucas's voice was sharp. He softened it immediately. "Stay, Genevieve, please." He moved to stand beside her chair, his hand resting protectively on her shoulder. "What brings you here after all these years?" Uncle Richard sighed. "I'm getting old, Lucas. When a man reaches my age, he starts to think about setting things right before it's too late." "And what exactly do you think needs to be set right?" Lucas asked, his tone carefully neutral. "I was wrong," Richard said simply. "About Caroline, about you leaving St. Louis, about all of it." Lucas's hand tightened on Genevieve's shoulder. She reached up to cover it with her own, offering silent support. "It's a little late for that," Lucas said, his voice tight with suppressed emotion. "Caroline is gone, has been for 15 years. I know." Richard's face showed genuine grief. "I didn't listen when you tried to tell me what was happening to her. I was too proud, too concerned with appearances. By the time I realized my mistake, you were gone and she—" He trailed off, unable to finish. Genevieve felt Lucas trembling slightly. She squeezed his hand and he drew a deep breath. "Why now?" he asked his uncle. "Why come looking for me after all this time?" Richard pulled an envelope from his coat pocket. "I received this 2 months ago, from a lawyer in San Antonio." Lucas took the envelope warily. Inside was a bank draft for a substantial sum, along with a brief note. "Richard Taylor, this represents your nephew's share of the family business with interest. He may not want it, but it is rightfully his. Lucas Taylor, White Rock Ranch, Del Rio, Texas." Lucas stared at the papers, then at his uncle. "You came because of money." "I came because it showed me you were still the honorable man your father raised," Richard corrected. "You could have kept that money, claimed it was lost in bad investments, or never acknowledged it at all. Instead, you tracked me down and returned what you felt wasn't yours, even though we hadn't spoken in 15 years. Genevieve looked up at her husband, understanding dawning. Lucas had never mentioned family money or a business in St. Louis. How much of his past had he kept from her? "The Taylor Shipping Company did well after you left," Richard continued. "Better than anyone expected. Your father's investments paid off handsomely. As his only son, half of it was rightfully yours." "I wanted nothing to do with it," Lucas said firmly. "Not after what happened to Caroline." Richard nodded sadly. "I know. And that was my failure, not seeing what that man was doing to her, not believing you when you tried to warn me." Genevieve could stand the confusion no longer. "Lucas," she said quietly, "what exactly happened with Caroline? You've never told me the full story." Lucas looked down at her, conflict evident in his eyes. Finally, he sat in the chair beside hers, still holding her hand. "After our parents died, Uncle Richard took us in," he began. "He was a successful businessman in St. Louis, respected, wealthy. Caroline was 16, I was 14. We were grieving, but we adjusted." He glanced at his uncle. "Richard did his best for us in his way." Richard nodded acknowledgement but remained silent. When Caroline turned 20, she met James Harrington. He was from a good family, charming, handsome. Uncle Richard approved of the match. Lucas's voice hardened. "But I saw through him. Saw how he changed when no one else was around, how he controlled her, isolated her from friends. I was blind, Richard admitted. Harrington's family had connections I wanted for the business. I refused to see what was happening right in front of me. They married, Lucas continued, and within a year, Caroline was a shadow of herself. Then James got into gambling, lost everything. When he died in a bar fight, his creditors came after Caroline. Genevieve squeezed his hand, understanding now why her situation had affected him so deeply. I was in Kansas City on business when it happened, Lucas went on, his voice hollow. By the time I returned, she had been forced into a labor contract with one of James's creditors, a man who had always had his eye on her. Lucas faltered. He abused her, Richard finished quietly. Terribly. And when Lucas tried to buy out the contract, I refused to provide the money. I believed it was a matter of honor that debts must be paid. Honor, Lucas's voice cracked with old anger. What honor was there in sending my sister to that monster? None, Richard admitted. I was wrong, Lucas, so terribly wrong. And by the time I realized it, Caroline had taken her own life and you had disappeared. The room fell silent except for the ticking of the clock on the mantel. Genevieve's heart ached for Lucas, for the young man who had lost his sister and then cut himself off from the only family he had left. I looked for you, Richard said finally. For years. Then I received your bank draft 2 months ago. It took some time to track you down specifically, but here I am. Lucas sat back in his chair, his face unreadable. What do you want from me, Uncle? Nothing you don't want to give, Richard answered. A chance to know you again, to meet your wife. His eyes moved to Genevieve, noting her condition for the first time. And your child when it arrives. Lucas was silent for a long moment. Then he looked at Genevieve, something vulnerable in his eyes, a silent question. She nodded slightly, encouraging him. You can stay for dinner, Lucas said finally. Beyond that, I make no promises. It was a small concession, but Richard accepted it gratefully. Thank you. That evening, over a meal prepared by Mrs. Ortiz, the conversation was stilted but civil. Richard shared news of St. Louis and former family acquaintances. Lucas spoke of the ranch and his plans for expansion. Genevieve watched her husband carefully, seeing the conflict within him, the desire to maintain his anger and the equally strong pull toward reconciliation. As Richard prepared to leave for his hotel in town, he paused on the porch. I've sold the business, he told Lucas. Got a good price for it. I'm too old to run it anymore and with no children of my own. He shrugged. The money is yours if you want it. If not, I'll donate it to charity in Caroline's name. Lucas stood stiffly, his face impassive. I don't need the money. No, I can see that. Richard looked around at the ranch house, the well-maintained buildings, the healthy cattle in the distance. You've built something good here, Lucas. Your father would be proud. Something in Lucas's expression softened slightly. Thank you for coming, Uncle Richard. Have a safe journey back to St. Louis. Actually, Richard said, I've purchased a house in San Antonio. At my age, the winters in Missouri were becoming too harsh, I thought. Well, I thought perhaps being closer might give us a chance to know each other again, if you're willing. Lucas didn't answer directly. Good night, Uncle, he said, his tone not unkind but not encouraging either. After Richard had gone, Genevieve and Lucas sat on the porch swing in silence, watching the stars emerge in the clear Texas sky. Are you angry that I didn't tell you about my family? Lucas finally asked. About the money, Genevieve rested her head on his shoulder. No. We all have parts of our past that are difficult to share, but I'm glad I know now. I left it all behind when I came west, he explained. The money, the name, the connections. I wanted to build something of my own, something honest. And you have, she assured him. But Lucas, he's your only family. "You're my family," he said firmly, his hand moving to rest on her growing belly. "You and our child." "Yes," she agreed. "But our child deserves to know their great-uncle, and you deserve a chance to heal that old wound." Lucas sighed, his breath warm against her hair. "When did you get so wise?" "I've always been wise," she teased. "You were just too stubborn to notice." He chuckled, the sound rumbling through his chest. "I'll think about it," he promised. "No guarantees, but I'll think about it." As the months passed and Genevieve's pregnancy progressed, Lucas did more than think about reconciliation with his uncle. Richard visited the ranch several times, initially for brief, somewhat uncomfortable conversations, then for longer visits. By November, when Genevieve reluctantly stepped away from her teaching duties, the two men had established a cautious relationship. "He's bringing furniture from the St. Louis house for the baby's room," Lucas told Genevieve one evening as they sat by the fire. "My old cradle, apparently, and some other things that belonged to my parents." "That's wonderful," Genevieve said, noting the mix of emotions on her husband's face. "How do you feel about that?" Lucas considered the question. "Strange," he admitted. "For so long I shut that part of my life away. But now—" He placed his hand on her rounded belly, smiling as the baby kicked against his palm. "Now I want our child to know where they come from, all of it, good and bad." Winter arrived early that year, with a cold snap in late November that froze the creek and coated the ranch in a layer of frost. Genevieve, heavy with child, found herself confined to the house more often than she liked. Lucas insisted on having one of the ranch hands nearby whenever he had to leave, concerned that she might need help. "I'm pregnant, not helpless," she protested when he arranged for Josiah to stay in the bunkhouse nearest the main house, while Lucas attended a cattle auction in San Antonio. "Humor me," he said, kissing her forehead. "It's my job to worry about you." "And mine to tell you when you're being ridiculous," she countered, but with a smile that took the sting from her words. Lucas was due to return on December 15th, 10 days before Christmas, and what Dr. Bennett estimated was 2 weeks before the baby would arrive. But on the evening of the 14th, a fierce winter storm blew in from the north, bringing howling winds and several inches of snow unusual for that part of Texas. Genevieve stood at the window, watching the swirling snow with concern. "He won't travel in this," she said to Mrs. Ortiz, who was preparing dinner. "He'll stay in San Antonio until it passes." "Señora," Mrs. Ortiz agreed. "Señor Taylor is smart man. He will be safe." But as the evening wore on and the storm intensified, Genevieve couldn't shake her worry. Lucas had promised to be home the next day, and he was a man who kept his promises, weather be damned. She was right to be concerned. Just after midnight, she was awakened by the sound of commotion in the yard. Wrapping herself in a robe, she made her way carefully downstairs to find Josiah and Mr. Ortiz helping a half-frozen Lucas into the house. "Lucas," she gasped, hurrying forward as quickly as her condition would allow. "What happened? Are you hurt?" "Just cold," he managed through chattering teeth. His face was pale beneath his beard, which was crusted with ice. "Horse spooked in the storm through me. Had to walk the last few miles." "Get him by the fire," Genevieve ordered, fear making her voice sharp. "Mrs. Ortiz, hot water and blankets." "Josiah, help me get these frozen clothes off him." Working together, they stripped Lucas of his ice-encrusted outer garments and wrapped him in warm blankets by the roaring fire. Mrs. Ortiz brought hot coffee laced with whiskey, which Lucas drank gratefully. "Of all the foolish, reckless things," Genevieve scolded once she was certain he wasn't seriously injured. "Traveling in a blizzard. You could have frozen to death." "Promised I'd be home," Lucas said, some color returning to his face as he warmed. "Didn't expect the storm to hit so fast." was halfway here when it got bad. And what good would your promise be if we found you frozen in a snowdrift? She was angry because she had been frightened, and they both knew it. Lucas caught her hand. I'm sorry for worrying you, he said more seriously, but I'm home now, safe. The baby chose that moment to deliver a particularly strong kick. Genevieve winced, then smiled despite herself. Your child is apparently as stubborn as you are. By morning, Lucas had recovered from his ordeal, though Genevieve insisted he rest for the day. The storm had passed, leaving the ranch covered in a pristine blanket of white that glittered in the winter sunshine. It's beautiful, Genevieve said, looking out at the transformed landscape from the porch, bundled in a heavy shawl. Lucas, standing behind her with his arms around her waist, his hands resting on her belly, nodded in agreement. Almost makes it worth nearly freezing to death. She elbowed him gently. Don't joke about that, I was terrified. I know. He kissed the top of her head. I'm sorry. But I needed to get home to you and the little one. Next time, trust that we'd rather have you arrive a day late than not at all, she admonished. The baby arrived on Christmas Eve, exactly 1 year after their wedding. The labor began in the early morning hours, awakening Genevieve with sharp pains that left no doubt about what was happening. Lucas, she gasped, shaking his shoulder. It's time. He was instantly alert, his eyes wide with a mixture of excitement and fear. Are you sure? It's early. Very sure, she confirmed as another contraction gripped her. Lucas sprang into action, sending Josiah to town for Dr. Bennett while Mrs. Ortiz prepared the bedroom. By mid-morning, Genevieve was deep in the throes of labor, with Lucas refusing to leave her side despite the doctor's suggestion that he wait downstairs. I'm staying, he said firmly, holding Genevieve's hand as she worked through another contraction. She needs me. Dr. Bennett shrugged. Suit yourself. Most men prefer to be elsewhere for this part. I'm not most men, Lucas replied, his eyes never leaving Genevieve's face. After hours of labor, as the winter sun was setting on Christmas Eve, their daughter entered the world with a lusty cry that immediately brought tears to Lucas's eyes. A girl, Dr. Bennett announced, cleaning the infant quickly before placing her in Genevieve's arms. A fine, healthy girl. Genevieve looked down at the tiny red face, overwhelmed with love. Hello, little one, she whispered. We've been waiting for you. Lucas sat on the edge of the bed, his face a study in wonder as he gazed at his wife and daughter. He reached out a tentative finger to touch the baby's small hand. She's perfect, he breathed. What will you name her? Dr. Bennett asked as he packed his bag. Genevieve looked at Lucas. They had discussed names but hadn't made a final decision. Caroline, she said softly. Caroline Rose Taylor. Lucas's eyes filled with tears. Are you sure? Very sure, Genevieve confirmed. She should be remembered with joy, not just sorrow. Lucas leaned forward and kissed her tenderly. Thank you, he whispered against her lips. That night, as Genevieve rested with the baby beside her in the cradle Uncle Richard had brought from St. Louis, Lucas sat in a chair by the bed, unwilling to leave them even to sleep. You should rest, Genevieve told him, though she was secretly glad for his presence. I will, he promised. I just want to look at you both a little longer. In the soft glow of the lamp, Genevieve studied her husband's face, the face that had been a stranger's to her just 18 months ago in the Del Rio town square. She saw in it all the love, all the hope, all the future they would build together. You ever think about that day? She asked softly. The auction, Lucas nodded, his eyes on their sleeping daughter. Often. Did you ever imagine we would end up here, that tearing up that contract would lead to? This? No, he admitted. I just knew I had to do something. That I couldn't stand by and watch history repeat itself. He moved from the chair to sit beside her on the bed. But I thank God every day that I was there, that I had the means to act. Genevieve reached for his hand. So do I. Outside, snow began to fall again, soft and gentle, nothing like the blizzard of days before. It dusted the ranch with fresh white, covering animal tracks and smoothing the landscape into pristine beauty. Inside, a family that had been born of chance, kindness, and love slept peacefully, safe in the knowledge that some debts could never be repaid nor were they meant to be. Some actions, like tearing up a contract that would have bound a woman's freedom, weren't meant to create obligation but to release it. And in that release, Lucas and Genevieve had found something neither had expected. A love as vast as the Texas sky and as enduring as the land beneath it. As the new year dawned, bringing with it fresh beginnings and promises, the Taylor family thrived. Genevieve, Lucas, and little Caroline Rose faced their future together, a future built not on contracts or debts, but on choice, respect, and abiding love. And in Del Rio, people still sometimes spoke of that day in the town square, when a reclusive rancher tore up a contract and set a woman free, never knowing that in doing so, he was freeing himself as well.